So welcome. This is the Commission's sixth meeting. And during today's meeting, I can tell by the sense of excitement that we're going to be voting finally on the recommendations based on both the state agency and the public feedback, as well as obviously numerous conversations and during the process from the Commission members as well. Before we get into the details on this, let me ask if there's everyone has had a chance to review the minutes. And if there is there a motion for the approval of the November 9th minutes?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Moved in second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The minutes are approved as written. The heart of this session here really kind of wraps things up in many ways is the voting procedure, so we can go through and discuss and approve hopefully everything here today. What I'd like to do at this time is ask Jeremy Baker if he would comment for all the commissioners as well as for the public on the voting process itself. Jeremy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the voting itself, the commission has 9 members, so a constitutional majority would be 5 members voting in the affirmative for the motion to approve whatever recommendation they're voting on. The commission will vote on recommendations by group. Group 1 is capacity, recommendations 1 through 11. Group 2 is maintenance, recommendations 12 through 29, or 19, excuse me. Group 3 is staffing, recommendations 20 through 29. Group 4 is funding, recommendations 30 through 33. Group 5 is equity, recommendations 34 through 37. And group 6 is climate change, recommendations 38 to 40. So the process, DLS will share a presentation so that the members and those watching can read through the recommendations. During this time, a member may unilaterally separate out an individual recommendation from a group for discussion, amendment, and voting after resolution of the remaining group. An example of how this works is as follows. DLS presents the capacity recommendations 1 through 11. A delegate separates recommendation 11 from the group. A senator then moves to adopt the group of recommendations, which after the separation would include recommendations 1 through 10. After the motion is approved or denied, the commission will then address the one that was separated, recommendation number 11. Upon a member making a motion to approve a group of recommendations, second, the commission will hold an oral yay or nay vote. If the oral vote is unclear, or if any member makes a request to do so, a roll call vote will be held. Finally, a member may offer and make motions to adopt new recommendations after all of the original recommendations have been considered. Any questions?
I don't think so. Don't see any hands up or anything.
I do.
Oh, I'm sorry. Good. Everyone okay then?
I have a
So-
question.
Yes,
A question. Can you hear me?
yes. Again,
Can you hear me?
Senator Edwards, you have the floor.
Okay. I didn't know if you heard me or not. Did I hear you right to say, let's say the first 11, if I have a question or a comment or whatever on 4 or 5, I have to wait till you go clear through 11 and then come back to that? Or can I ask it while you're on 4 or 5, 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever?
So Mr. Chair, if you'd like,
Did I mishear what you said?
so if we'd like to have a discussion as DLS is going through recommendations, that's perfectly fine. Basically, that would be your chance to separate any one of the recommendations out of the group. After there is a motion on the group of recommendations, the motion has to be acted on. So basically, there would be the opportunity then to, let's say, remove recommendation number 11 from group number 1. And then a motion would be on numbers 1 through 10, and we would circle back to number 11 and deal with it individually. Does that make sense, Senator Edwards?
Well, that still doesn't answer my question. Let's say you get to number 7. I don't know. And I have a question on 7. Do I have to wait till you go through 11 and then say I want to pull out 7 to make a comment on or ask a question about, or can I ask it when you're doing number 7? So we don't have to backtrack.
I'll defer to the chair, but my instinct would be that you could just say something as we're going through it.
Right. I had talked with the staff a little bit about the process to make sure that I understood what was going on. And I think for expediency's sake, it will be best to go ahead, if you have a question or comment, to do it when that comes up. If it turns out that it's going to be either involved or actually require a separate vote because of addition or change, then we'll put it on the table for a little bit, finish with the whole section, and then come back and handle those. Is that clear to everyone? Okay, in that case, then why don't we go ahead and start with our first grouping, which is the capacity recommendations.
Okay, Mr. Chair, so capacity recommendations, there are 11 recommendations in this category. Recommendation number 1 reflected here. Recommendations 2, 3, and 4 reflected on slide 9. Recommendations 5, 6, 7, and 8 reflected on slide 10. Recommendations 9 and 10 reflected on slide 11. And then the final recommendation number 11 on slide 12. So at this point, Mr. Chairman, you could make or somebody could move to adopt recommendations 1 through 11 would be an opportunity.
I move to adopt recommendations 1 through 11.
Okay, has moved 1 through 11
Second.
and second.
Does Senator Edwards have a question or is that a thumbs up?
Can we talk about, if we could, each one of the, if there's any of these recommendations that the department has opposed? I don't know if we've had that discussion at all yet or not.
Department
don't-
doesn't.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, please.
I don't believe the department, I don't recall them flat out opposing any recommendation. They had submitted comments back to us on a number of the recommendations. And I believe, Andrew, those were distributed to members, right? The commentary from DNR.
Correct.
Yes, they were.
Okay.
So the question, obviously, then, that we have a motion and a second for the first approval of the recommendations 1 through 11 on capacity. Are there any specific questions or comments that people wish to make at this time?
Senator Edwards, did you have something?
I was going to just say, if you do,
I do.
right, could, for a favor for me, but for everyone as well, because of the PowerPoint being in the middle of the screen there, I'm not seeing everyone. And so someone may have a flag up that they want to talk. So please feel free to speak out as well. And then you'll pop up at the sidebar here. So Senator Edwards, yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess maybe on just more or less a comment, or I don't know why we're really asking them to look at it, because I don't know there's anything you can do to change it. And I brought this up, I think it's the last meeting, about wildlife management areas listed in 4 and 5. I'm not sure, because of federal law and how they were established, that you can actually change the function of them. So I question why we put that in there. I mean, I don't have a big problem with it, because when they study it, they're going to come back and say we can't make it a state park anyway. At least that's my understanding. I just bring that out for thought processes. And number 7, and by the way, I did read all these last night, and Delegate Lukey, you're right. The department did bring up a bunch of them that they're already working on and said these things are in the works and we're looking at them. But number 7 deals with investigate the possibility of providing improved public access to privately owned land. I just think I think the biggest thing, I mentioned this last time, is concern about liability. And maybe we could put the words in there, particularly looking at liability issues. As part of that, it says public access to privately owned land, and particularly the liability issues associated with.
Mr. Chairman,
A little more in depth.
Mr. Chairman, can we just, let's separate recommendation 7 and move adoption of 1 through 11 without recommendation 7 for now, so we can.
Senator, I think Senator Edwards had questions about 4 and 5 as well that we
Oh,
should
really? Okay.
discuss.
I
So,
brought that up about wildlife management area. I do have a question on number 11 though. And I did mention this because I think that people misinterpreted what I was talking about. But Delegate Lukley, as usual, you were correct. Privatization wasn't the correct word.
Right.
And I think number 11 talks about concessions. I believe it was number 11.
why don't we go ahead with the vote on 1 through 3, and then we can discuss 4 and 5 and move on from there. Would that make sense?
I think if there's
I'm
no
fine with
question.
that. I don't want to be a pain in the butt here.
No,
I'm just
no. That's why we're having this meeting, Senator, is to talk through these. So,
All right, so if there are no questions, can we just vote at this stage on 1 through 3? All of those in favor?
aye.
Aye. Those first 3 are approved. Go to recommendation 4.
So, Mr. Chairman, recommendations 4 and 5, the issues related to wildlife management areas. Recommendation 4 asks DNR to work on increasing the availability of recreational opportunities in other state-owned areas such as wildlife management areas and state forest lands. There are wildlife management areas which have, for example, I mean, the most common recreational opportunity on them that's non-hunting related would be things like hiking and birding. So, for example, McKee-Bescher's Wildlife Management Area in Montgomery County is a very popular site to visit in the fall because the state plants significant fields of sunflowers, which they then leave for wildlife in order to attract wildlife for the hunters. So, Senator, my read on recommendation 4 would be that it wouldn't interfere with the wildlife management area continuing to be focused on the requirements under state and federal law for what wildlife management areas could be focused on. It's just saying, hey, in addition, if there's an opportunity to put a trail in this wildlife management area outside of hunting season so people can use it, for hiking outside of hunting season, let's look at that possibility. Does that address your concern?
Well, yeah, I know they can do that, but the biggest concern is these were established mainly for hunting because that's how they were just with the purchases of guns, ammunition, licenses, et cetera, coming back from the feds to do that. I don't really have a problem with it when the DNR looks at it. You really need to look at how it interplays with the federal government because of how they were purchased as they look. You can do all these things you mentioned in a wildlife management area. I agree with that.
Right.
The concern is that I don't, because in most state parks, you can't hunt.
Right.
So that's where the intermingling comes in. So I just wanted to bring it to the attention of the group. I don't have a problem as long as they thoroughly evaluate the interplay with the federal government, how these lands were purchased and what they were purchased for. So I'm okay with 4 and 5, it kind of related.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think, I would expect DNR and implementation would pay close attention to federal law and particularly those wildlife management areas that were purchased with federal money and avoid redesignating them. So, yeah, I get your point, though. And I agree. It's important that we maintain opportunities for hunters to access, opportunities to hunt.
And so there, in all the different discussions and all, I heard nothing implying that anyone wanted to move in a different direction on that. So I think your concerns are legitimate and incorporated in the language that's there. They're not going to be able to do it. They can't do it. That's it. And if they can do it, then it'll be a nice addition to everything. Mm-hmm. So as I understand it, there was no concern about 6. So maybe we could move for 4, 5, and 6 at this time. And there were some questions on 7 and 8.
So moved.
Okay, so I heard a movement for approval of recommendation 4, 5, and 6. Do I hear a second?
Yep.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is approved. That brings us to recommendation 7.
Yeah, I have a question on that. Comment, I might mention it real quick. I'll do this quickly. I think it would be good. I think the biggest concern I hear out here are private property owners working with the state is a liability issue. I know staff went through this the last meeting, but I think it would make it stronger to add, and I'm not a word expert here, but access to privately owned land, particularly looking at the liability issue, and add that wording in recommendation 7 at the end of number 1.
Could we add, Jeremy, Andrew, maybe you can recommend how best to wordsmith this, but the General Assembly should require DNR to 1, investigate the possibility of providing improved public access to privately owned land. 2, recommend to the General Assembly any changes to liability law in order to assist private landowners in making their properties available, and then include its findings in the master plan a new 3. Does that get at what you're looking for, Senator Edwards?
It makes it stronger. Again, at least in my part of the state, the liability issue is an issue, whether people in the more metropolitan area don't agree. Out here they do, because that's a big concern. And I think if we can address, while they're looking at this, thoroughly address that liability issue of the property owner, might stimulate more private property owners to work with a lease with the state to allow functions, activities on their land. So yeah, if that wording's fine, I'm okay with it.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I was say if we can also too add some language in that recommendation that the intent of this is voluntary, because I'm sure if we were to put this out there, that folks, these property owners will be very concerned that the state's going to look at their property and allow just the general public to come onto their property with, certainly without their permission or, anything like that. And obviously that's certainly in violation of, probably the Constitution, I would imagine. It'd be illegal for the state to do that without condemnation or anything like that. But I just want to, if we could just have language in there, just lets people know that that's not the intent of this recommendation, to have the state come in and just allow people to use their land.
Delegate Grice, would it resolve your concern if we amended the number 1 there, investigate the possibility of providing improved public access to privately owned land on a voluntary basis?
Something along those lines, sure.
Aren't these primarily lands, though, in which there's been a easement granted for one purpose or another over the years?
Not necessarily the way the recommendation is worded. So the way the recommendation is worded, it's worded fairly broadly. It doesn't refer specifically to easements. And it's Senator, it's not just an issue in rural parts of the state. I mean, we deal with it in Montgomery County in the Ag Reserve with farmers being worried about opening their lands to hunting. So same sort of issue.
They would have to get a lease with the property owner in there some way, what they want to do with agreement with the property owner.
Is this a priority for anyone in particular? I mean, I don't, from my perspective, I don't know why it's absolutely necessary to even have this as a recommendation at all.
I think the goal, Delegate, sorry, Senator Alfred, you want to? I was just going to say, I think part of the goal is there are lands, for example, held in trust by land trusts that are not made broadly available to the public for recreational access. We're not necessarily talking about people tramping through somebody's backyard. We're talking about, access to land trusts and situations where, I mean, for example, there are private landowners that own land along the Appalachian Trail, right? And so they work out agreements where there's public recreational access through their property. But it's entirely voluntary. It's not the government forcing anybody to do anything.
So is it consent? So is voluntary or consent? Like they give consent for this to go forward, right? The landowner.
Yeah, I mean, Delegate Grice, do you have a preference, voluntary or consent, or?
I think it's the same thing. I'm not an attorney. I mean, to me, it sounds the same.
Anything they do, they have to get permission and a written document with the landowner.
Right.
before they can do anything.
So not trying to be redundant on that, but why don't we just go ahead and use both of them and just say with the voluntary consent?
I just want to be real clear on what the intent is. That's all.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, Delegate Grice, I think this recommendation came to light for me. I represent CERC, which is the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center in the southern part of my district that has wonderful trails, and during the pandemic opened up those trails to my community. And I look at this recommendation as DNR actively exploring other opportunities with any privately owned land, be it federal or county or privately by an individual, to look for those opportunities, but certainly not forcing anybody. It would be proactively seeking voluntary consent.
Okay. No, I don't want to get in the way of this. Certainly, I mean, obviously on the Eastern Shore, open space and public access is not an issue. So I certainly don't want to get in the way of obviously public access, certainly in your district, because that's a big concern. It's even a concern, obviously, for me as well. Obviously we're concerned about the whole state, not just where we live.
So let me ask on this, Jeremy and Andrew. Should we get a conceptual approval on this, or should we just pull it out and wait and circulate the final language? I think there's only a few additional words there that make it clearer. And if the commission is comfortable with it, we can approve it here today, knowing that those words will be wordsmithed into the final, and that final will be circulated, and then there'll be a last vote and opportunity at that stage.
Well,
Chairman.
certainly, Mr. Chairman, Jeremy, I defer to you, but what I heard is that recommendation 7 could say, based on all the comments just now, the General Assembly should require DNR to, 1, investigate the possibility of providing improved public access to privately owned land on a voluntary consent basis. 2, recommend to the General Assembly any changes needed to the liability law. And then 3, include its findings in the master plan.
All right. That is what I heard. I mean, does that make everyone comfortable in terms of what we're trying to do here?
Yes.
I'm okay.
I would move adoption of modified recommendation number 7.
Second.
Been moved and second for approval of recommendation 7. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The recommendation is approved. And that brings us to the last couple in this section.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I have a question on number 11.
okay. All right,
Just bear with me.
8 and 9, okay?
Yes,
Okay, so let's just
Me.
move to 11 and then
Me.
we'll do these 3.
and 10.
Mr. Chairman, I move adoption of recommendations 8, 9, and 10.
Second.
Been moved and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those 3 are approved as well. We'll go to recommendation 11.
Yeah, I just asked everybody to bear with me here. Since we're doing this big report, I think we need to hear all sides of the report and thought processes. I did ask Senator Elfritz, who did call me the other day, talked about concessionaires or concessions. I brought up about privatization, which probably, again, was the wrong word. And Delegate Lutke, with his expertise in wording, said maybe that's not the correct wording, and I agree, but that wasn't what I was really getting at, because I wasn't saying turn everything over to private enterprise and the hell with DNR in the state, they'll do what they want. I just want to know, and here's where I'm coming from. In my district probably has more state parks with cabins and probably even campsites, which are big expense items. We talk about money, we got to figure out how to raise money to maintain things. And then this report, we're going to talk about getting more land to put into state parks, which means you need more money, blah, blah, blah. So does contract mean the same thing as concession? And what I'm talking about here is, and I'll use New Germany for an example. Some of you probably been there. They have 12 cabins. The park manager said they could use 12 more. We don't have enough money to maintain them. How are we going to come up with money to build more if we want more opportunities for people to recreate? And recreate, part of that is to come out here or wherever and stay in a cabin for a week or a weekend or something and enjoy the atmosphere surrounding those cabins. So we may want to contract those kind of things out, camping and or cabins, where you can get private industry maybe to come in and build additional ones. And through a contract, which is probably no different than what we have at Rocky Gap with the casino, to build more with the approval of DNR and the criteria of doing it, and kind of run them? Or am I way off base here and just say, hopefully we get a governor or somebody to put enough money in to add cabins and campsites at these places?
I personally think that the latter would work a lot better. Here's part of the challenge as I see it. Senator, I appreciate you coming from a different part of the state in the sense of the number and size of the parks and how they're magnets for people from throughout the state and all. But on the privatization, and I have strong concerns in other areas as well, and I think we're starting to see that be realized about for example, on building roads and privatizing them and leasing it out for 25 years and so on. And it's great difficulties that come there. I think that having concessions for some of the things, the most notable example is literally the food and concessionaires and things of that type. But the overall long-term lease to build facilities and then to permit the outside company running that, I think is fraught with problems. And where you exactly draw a line in terms of writing here, we want to be open so the private, so small business and all could lease some things like the food concession, but not to the point that it's so far open that it becomes a privatization of parts of the park system. I don't know about other commissioners, but I think that was generally the concerns that I had when I spoke against it earlier on.
No, I agree with you. If you get someone to put the money in, like the governor to put money in to do it, or DNR to switch their budget around to do these things. But I think we need to look down the road here. You know, I've been on program open space for going on 40 years, dealing with their issues and making, I think, positive changes to that program. And just trying to think, you know, I think we need to look at all avenues, how might be a better way to expand some of these things. I'm not going to go to the woodwork on it if you don't want that in there. My question though is concessionaire mean the same thing as a contract?
Senator Edwards, first of all, I just turned 40, so you've been working on program open space as long as I've been alive.
Thank you for
the answer to your question,
notification.
Senator Edwards, the answer to your question is yes. So concession is a term of art within the parks community, right? And so a concession is a contract with a private organization that then runs facilities within a park that otherwise wouldn't be offered to park goers. So as an example, the food service and rentals at Assateague National Seashore, or some of the lodging and food and beverage service at Skyland and Big Meadows in Shenandoah National Park are private concessions, and they're managed under a contract with the National Park Service. And we have a number of concessions already in our state parks. For example, at Assateague State Park, the rentals of beach equipment is through a private concessionaire. So it is essentially a contract between the Park Service and a private organization to provide services that the Park Service can't provide on its own.
We have that out here too, concessions at the parks where you can get refreshments, etc.
Right.
I'm just looking at the bigger items. How do we maybe expand them moving forward, which might need a little different approach with that. I'll keep quiet. I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention because I think people misinterpreted what I was trying to say to begin with about privatization. I wasn't say privatize and give it to someone.
Right.
How do we, as we're doing this major look at here, how do we look at expanding some of these things in the total globe of the park service, so to speak? And with that all.
Mr. Chair, I want to thank Senator Edwards for starting this conversation because I think it is incredibly important. for everybody's district. I think about my district and I think about, kayak rentals and stand-up paddleboarding lessons and rentals and things like that, that frankly DNR just is never going to have the capacity to accomplish. And that's where this piece of concessionaires comes in. So I want to thank Senator Edwards for bringing this up. And I think we've met at the best place we can on this recommendation. So I would like to move recommendation 11.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded for approval of the recommendation 11 as worded on the screen here. Further comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it. The motion is approved. So we have then outstanding 12, 13, and 14.
So moving now to the next category, these are recommendations 12 through 19. I'll move through them quickly. So the recommendations 12, 13, 14, as the chair just said, are on the screen right now. Recommendations 15, 16, 17, reflected here on slide 14, and then recommendations 18 and 19 on slide 15.
These all have to do with the maintenance issue.
Correct.
If there's no discussion, I would move adoption of recommendations 12 through 19.
Heard a motion for approval
Second.
through 19 and a second. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The maintenance cluster groupings, I guess we're calling them, is approved. Next, 20 through 29 on staffing.
Correct. So recommendation number 20 on slide 16, recommendation 21 on slide 17, recommendations 22, 23, and 24, slide 18, recommendations 25, 26, and 27 on slide 19, and then finally on slide 20, recommendations 28 and 29.
Questions or comments on any of the recommendations 20 through 29?
Can we just pull out the ones that are going to have a fiscal note attached to them? I just don't want to create an unfunded mandate. I mean, obviously I understand and I certainly support more staffing where it's needed. I just don't, I mean, it seems 100 seems like an arbitrary number at this point. And I just don't know what the effects are with a potential unfunded mandate. That's all.
Mr. Chairman, this is, my understanding is there's no money attached to this right now. This is just concept. So in order to fund it, the governor would either, he or she would either need to include it in their budget, or in this case, he, or the General Assembly would have to pass legislation to that effect. So this is not a funded mandate right now. This is just concept. Is that?
Yeah, it's a recommendation, though.
Yeah.
These are recommendations, and part of this recommendation comes with, more the necessity for more money, that more expenditure in these line items. I mean, obviously, when we're talking about adding pins in positions, obviously there's an expense associated with that, and we don't even know what that cost is. I mean, without knowing, I don't know that I'm prepared to make a recommendation, without knowing what the cost is going to be. If we could just pull those line items out, and I don't know if anyone has an idea of which ones are going to potentially require more spending. For those, I'll oppose.
Delegate Grace, we can go through them. I think let's start with recommendation 20, which is the recommendation about increasing staffing eventually to threshold of 1 to 30,000. I'd move that individually for a vote. And I think, Mr. Chairman, I think these will want to be roll call votes then.
Yes. Okay, so we have a motion for approval, recommendation 20.
Mr. Chair, Senator Edwards has his hand up.
Well, it's not on this one, it's on 27. But who came up with 30,000? 1 per 30,000.
So the number 1 per 30,000 is approximately the ratio that the Park Service was at a little over a decade ago, before the Great Recession.
Well, I've talked to a lot of people here lately where they do say there aren't enough people in the parks to run them appropriately, I'll put it that way. So I understand delegates' concern, but they do need, I believe, some additional personnel. But I'll wait till you get to 27, Senator.
And so Ed was echoing up what you said. A lot of the reasons given for the closing, which was what really made this a front burner issue in many ways, was because of lack of staff at several of the parks closing during the pandemic. So, okay, so we have a recommendation, a motion for approval of recommendation 20.
Second.
Moved in second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
This is 20, right?
20.
20.
Aye.
Aye.
Do I hear any nays?
Delegate Grice is an A on that one.
So that is approved with one nay.
And that's number 20, right?
That's 20, correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, did you want to do a formal roll call or just have me record Delegate Grice as a nay?
Well, in this case, since there was only one nay, I think, yes, but you should record it that way, which would be
Okay.
another formal roll call, yes. Okay, so are we going to do each one of these separately now for here, or just the ones that pertain to staffing levels?
I think just the staffing ones that require,
It's an unfunded mandate. Of them are not.
so Delegate Grice, 21 focuses just on increasing, building out a volunteer management program modeled on the National Park Service's Volunteers and Parks Program.
Probably
Do you see
not.
that? You see that as an unfunded mandate?
Well, I'm sure it's a nominal cost. There's going to be obviously initial staff that's going to, you'll need to manage volunteers, but I'm okay with that one.
Okay, since it's before us there, do we hear a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Moved in second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Chairman, what is the next one that involves the?
I'll defer to Andrew on the fiscal note effect of each of these recommendations, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair.
And I will defer to the fiscal note writers since I'm a budget analyst. Well, okay, I'll attempt. So for recommendation number 22, DNR is supposed to work with the Department of Budget and Management to improve the hiring process. This does not appear on its face to have a large fiscal impact. I'm sure there's going to be nominal costs to kind of changing somewhat the process that they would go through for the hiring purposes. They are modifying currently the waiver, the administrative waiver. They're providing an administrative waiver already through, I believe it's July 22. So it seems reasonable that this would be a recommendation that would not have a large fiscal note cost.
Now, Delegate Grice, you had asked earlier about the DNR response, and I believe that they had the provision in here that recommends providing the Park Service with an administrative waiver to the Maryland State Online Employment Center hiring process that's used to hire temporary employees. They had I mean, as close as their language came to opposing, they had concerns about that.
All right, so I'll vote nay on that one.
Okay, so I have a motion then on.
I would move favorable on adoption of that recommendation.
Second.
22 and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
And the record should show the nay votes being
Nay.
our recommendation 23. '23 and '24 should be fairly straightforward, and
I'm okay with both.
Does it increase funding for the program? But okay, you're good with that. So for 23 and 24,
It's not, or it's not, we're not adding 100 positions. I'm sure it's just a couple.
Mr. Chair, move adoption of recommendations 23 and 24.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Did you get Senator or Delegate Grice, myself negative on 22? There was 2 no's on.
Yep. Senator Delegate Grice and Senator Edwards both nay on recommendation 22.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we move now to recommendation 25.
This would not
Number 25.
formally have a big budgetary impact. I mean, it would require kind of retooling a little bit the pipeline of new employees, new rangers coming in though.
I'm good.
I think according to DNR, they're basically doing that now. I move to approve.
Second.
Been moved and seconded for approval of recommendation 25. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Approved without dissent. Recommendation 26.
I don't have that one in front of me, unfortunately. I'm looking at an email that was sent. It goes from 25 to 28, unfortunately. I think 26 will have to do with the one where our rangers are going to have like law enforcement training.
No, that's later on. So
Okay.
26 addresses an issue of the Rangers have raised an issue of what they believe to be salary misclassification of certain positions within the Ranger service. So this asks DBM to resolve those employee classification issues that result in differential pay levels between some employees and their direct supervisors.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I move adoption of recommendation 26.
Been moved. Wait a second. Moved to second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
26 is approved without dissent. Recommendation 27.
Comment, Mr. Chairman. The way this is written, as I read it, this says do an annual salary review, which means to me every year you're going to do an annual salary review. First of all, the state negotiates with employees now, which they didn't do not too long ago down the road. And secondly, unless it's changed, and I guess I would ask staff this, it used to be that all positions were to be looked at once every 3 years for salary, where each position is, et cetera. I'm going to look back, and I don't know, Governor, if this was under your tenure as governor, but if you remember, we had trouble recruiting state police officers because we weren't paying enough. Counties were actually paying more than we were. So we had them do a 1-year kind of a study on salaries, et cetera. They came back with a very good approach. We adopted it, and it made it a heck of a lot easier to get people to join the police forces. I don't think we want to throw this out of whack. If we do this every year for them, you're going to have other groups come in and say, we want an annual salary review. Can we look at the idea of saying do a 1-year thorough evaluation of wages or salaries or whatever you want to call it, and then get in line like everybody else once every 3 years, unless Andrew or someone can tell me that process has changed. I mean, it kind of does the same thing, but you start saying to this group, we're going to do an annual review. I think we better be aware you're going to have every group coming in saying you gave them an annual salary review. Let's do one for A, B, C, and D. Where if you have them do a 1-year thorough evaluation, set the wages where they ought to be versus where they are now, and then you do it like every other group once every 3 years. They all get they on a scale, of course, they get evaluated, And it's also part of the negotiation process, is my understanding of how this works now.
Mr. Chair, I believe that the word annual was my addition because I wanted to give some type of context to the reviews. And I agree with Senator Edwards. I think our intention, the commission's intention, was to do it immediately to understand the context, because we are facing this issue. We heard from many rangers, county and national are paying much more. So I consider it a friendly amendment if the group does as well.
Perhaps,
And a friendly amendment, meaning delete the word annual at this stage.
well, actually, the annual salary review is a term of art. It doesn't mean done every year. It means that, you know, at some point, like there's a review done of salaries, and then they're done for many different classifications across the state. So a potential change could be to immediately to conduct an annual salary review and every 3 years thereafter.
Yeah, but someone not familiar with that's going to look at that and say, that means you got to do one every year. I think, I might be wrong. I think the general public would see that. Where if you said, let's do a major study this year or 1 year, look at all of them, bring them up to where they ought to be, because I can guarantee you they're not where they ought to be. Bring them up where they ought to be, and then you fall in line with the word you're talking about, that means once every 3 years or whatever you mentioned there. I just think it's less confusing.
Andrew,
Well,
is the word, I appreciate it's a term of art, but to the average reader who's not involved in necessarily government, salary issues, it does imply every year. I mean, what's a better way to parse this?
Is required DNR and DBM immediately to conduct a salary review and then conducts one every 3 years thereafter. We just take out the word annual. I think probably the general idea would be still there.
If we include the word immediately, yeah.
Yeah, so immediately to conduct a salary review and every 3 years thereafter.
Andrew, I think we may not want to include the every 3 years thereafter language, just in case the 3-year cycle, is 2 years from now. You know what I mean? We would sort of be setting a new date for that 3-year cycle, as opposed to just kind of falling in place, as Senator Edwards was suggesting.
My understanding is that they're not actually done on a 3-year cycle. So it's done more on an ad hoc basis. So you would be putting in structure that may not be there already.
Can't you just put the words in cycle and follow the cycle, and that cycle changes? So it changes, that changes. I mean,
Well, there might not be a cycle. I
Pardon
think
me?
it feels very much like a reactive process at this point, where if people push for a salary review of some kind, then it occurs, but it's not necessarily scheduled in any kind of stipulated way. So if you were to put in immediately to conduct a salary review and every 3 years thereafter, I think you would be putting in structure that's not currently there.
Why don't we just say then, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, why don't we just say then that Senator Edwards, if you feel comfortable, we'll just say, and to be reviewed again 3 years from now, from the date of the first review or something.
Senator,
I'm fine with that, or we can shorten it and just say do an immediate salary review.
Well, that we will do, but we should also, yes, agreed. And my thought would be, we want to revisit it, so we could say, and we will revisit it again 3 years from now, and that way it's not ongoing, but at least we know there's another date in sight that we can do another review of it.
There are a number of different ways been advanced just now to say basically the same thing. Several components to it. One is drop the word annual because that will be read as a literal annual by the general public, and we don't want to be appearing to do that. Secondly, though, there is the question of doing it again in the future. And part of the reason we're in the big gap that we're here, someone mentioned that we're not competitive with the federal or county park systems. The same is true even for the municipal park systems in many cases, and the regional ones like park and planning. So we are really behind on the salaries. And so I think the idea of dropping the annual, but suggesting subsequent reviews would be appropriate. In other words, it's not just enough to do it now and say, okay, that's done, let's forget about it and move on. Personally, I think the every 3 years does make sense, and helps us not to get in that same trap again in the future. I'm sure that there'll be plenty of discussion from a purely administrative view if that does pose some kind of major problem, but I can't see a major problem in it myself. So if I could synthesize what several people have said and perhaps have recommendation 27, but dropping the word annual and adding words for that will require a repeat, a review, let's say every 3 years thereafter or something of that type. That should then bring most of what was said. Senator Edwards, you have a question?
Oh, no.
I would move adoption of recommendation 27 as modified.
Second.
Seconded. Everyone's clear on the changes there?
Just one question. You did have immediately to conduct. Do you want immediately in there too?
Yeah.
Immediately to conduct a salary review and every 3 years thereafter?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so the motion is then to add immediately to conduct a salary review in every 3 years thereafter.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Good, thank you.
Is this the kind of thing you all argue about in your appropriations and budget committees?
We move faster than this, though.
Breakneck speed. Yeah.
28.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I could briefly address 28. 28 has changed from what it was in the last conversation, in part as a result of stakeholder feedback in what the previous recommendation 28 was. There have been issues raised regarding NRP coverage in the parks. And essentially, as modified, this recommendation simply says that DNR is going to report back to the General Assembly on what that coverage looks like and what the staffing levels of NRP officers are within state park units during the peak season. And I think part of the discussion here for the longer term conversation is NRP understaffed as well? And are they essentially oversubscribed? Can they not do everything the state's asking them to do with the current force?
Does anyone have questions on recommendation 28? It's become fairly generalized from where we were, basically saying we have a problem and DNR report the adequacy of it and see where we go from there. But it became pretty complicated, some of the discussions to try to sort out just in the commission level. Hearing no other comments on it, do I hear a motion to approve recommendation 28?
So moved.
Second.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's approved without dissent. Recommendation 29.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion is approved without, the recommendation approved without dissent. We'll go next to the funding recommendations.
Recommendations 30 to 33, 30 through 32 are reflected on slide 21. And then recommendation 33 is reflected on slide 22.
There's no discussion. I'd move adoption of recommendations 30 through 33.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded for recommendations 30 through 33 with regard to funding. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Approved without dissent.
So
Next one, equity.
correct, Mr. Chairman, so recommendations 34 to 37, 34 and 35 reflected here on slide 23, 36 and 37 reflected on slide 24.
Questions? Any discussion on this at all?
Move the recommendations.
Been moved for approval. Recommendations 34 through 37. Second? Do I hear a second?
Second.
Patterson, good. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion is approved without dissent. Go to climate change.
Recommendations 38 through 40 are climate change recommendations. Recommendation 38 and 39 reflected on slide 25, and then recommendation 40 on slide 26.
Questions on these recommendations?
I'd move adoption of recommendations 38 through 40.
I think Senator Edwards has a question.
I have a question.
Senator Edwards?
Thank you. We had a program, joint program, open space, ag land preservation, Zoom this morning. And this talks about this number 38, doing a 30-30 goal. To conserve at least 30% of Maryland's land and waters by 2030. I asked them because I know at some point, and Chairman Young also agreed, we put something in the law saying that the goal was blank. I don't know what that goal was to have under conservation, whether it's state purchased or easements or whatever, certain acreage. And I don't know if Andrew looked that up since that meeting or not. I did ask the question because I think we need to know these things. How many acres are there in the state of Maryland? Land acres are 6,189,629 acres. That doesn't count water. He didn't have that number. He being the person from planning, he was supposed to get that and get back to us. So the way I read this, it says Maryland's land and waters. So it'd be nice to know how many acres we're talking about here. And does this include, for example, we looked at the ag land preservation goal, which was set years ago. And we changed it from 2023 to 2030, I think, was 1,030,000 acres. We've hit 853,527 acres. Now, is that number to go into this 30 by 30 goal or not?
Yeah,
Or are we just talking about other kinds of land,
no,
state parks, blah, blah, blah?
Sorry, Senator, I didn't mean to interrupt you. The 30 by 30 proposal, the 30 by 30 proposal that's being discussed at the national level and now in a number of states counts agricultural easements and ag land preservation as part of that conserved land. So this would argue for, among other things, continuing the state's commitment to funding the ag land preservation programs we have.
So is it
Where we at now?
Is it appropriate then to have the expert come up with the acres
So
that we already have and put that in here and say, here's what we already have and here's what we need to get to?
yeah, my understanding is we are at approximately, I think, 24% or 25% right now of the land with our current preservation programs. So this would essentially say, let's continue on the path we've been on.
So I think I'm not wanting to debate this, but I think it would be good knowledge wise for not only us, but the public to know how many acres are in each category and then have the total so people know, have a better idea of what's encompassed in what. I'm not trying to elongate the conversation here, but I think for the public's knowledge and our own knowledge, what actually are we looking at it? And I don't disagree. I think you're right. We're 24, 25, somewhere there, but what's the total acres, land, water? Here's what we have preserved under ag land preservation categories, and here's what we have under state forest, parks, wildlife management areas, etc. This is a total for all of them, so we need blank yet to go. Or we have this to go yet to get to by 2030.
If I may,
And
that's something
put
that
those
certainly could
numbers
be,
in number 30.
that
They
certainly
asked
something
for?
could be included in the final report, if that's the commission's will. So then the recommendation could stand as is, and then the report itself could delineate the information you're noting, Senator Edwards. Would be that be satisfactory?
I think we need to have it somewhere. I think people need to know, see the numbers, so we're not coming back, or whoever's sitting there, Eric, you'll be there in 2030 and say, back in 2021, we looked at this and, we just said reach this goal by 2030. We didn't know, nobody knew the numbers. Here what the numbers were, here's where we're at now, and here's where we're going to get. So if it's somewhere that people can see it, whether it's in this or listed under 38 or it's in the separate report that I guess we're doing, that's fine with me. I just think it needs to be out there.
And also too, I mean, what is the acreage? And we're only talking about 8 years, and how are we going to attain that over 8 years? Because obviously there's a cost associated with it, because, even with ag land preservation, in order to take someone's development rights and their property rights, you want to compensate them for that. And it's very expensive to do that. And if the state wants to expand on, state-owned land as well, obviously that's also very expensive over time too. So, I mean, are we creating a commitment that is unattainable or not? And also too, I would say at this point, we've already picked all the low hanging fruit, in the state, so what truly is left, and is this even possible?
I'm going to be carrying a bill that calls for a 30 by 30 goal. And we've been looking into exactly these questions, and they're exactly the right questions to be asking. Delegate Grice, to your point, yes, it isn't attainable. We as long as we maintain funding for Maryland agricultural land preservation and all the other easement and conservation programs, we will be close to 30% by 2030 as long as we continue funding, right? So we're heading in that direction. The issue is, does the state maintain its current funding commitment to these programs? And, certainly there are significant lands that, if easement funds are oversubscribed, ag easement funds. So, there are significant lands that we could preserve with, continued funding.
Or if you can just add to the definition, solar farms, because I know that there's thousands of acres that are going to be consumed in the next 10 years with solar panels. I know they're already in the pipeline. So if that can be counted toward that goal, that would help. But there's too many unanswered questions for this one, but I can understand the purpose here. So
I think that Andrew's suggestion that the actual numbers would be part of the information part of the accompanying report would make a lot of sense, particularly in the context of recommendations, just that the Maryland General Assembly should consider the goal. And we already know, because one of our most distinguished members is going to be leading the consideration. And so at this point, we're just urging the consideration, and here are the figures that are being discussed. How many in terms of acres? Put that in the report side. Would that work for everyone? I personally, by the way, like the goal and think it makes a lot of sense, and especially on the water side, in terms of both stormwater management and wetlands. But regardless of how it works out, for all we're saying here is we're urging the legislature, the General Assembly, to go ahead and consider that. and the report will have those exact numbers. Is that reasonable to everyone? And if there is, we need a separate motion on this one.
I'd just say, Governor, that we've had before, and we haven't reached them, we've changed the goal. So this would be no different than for 24, 25 now. Let's give it a shot to get down to 2030. We're not there. You just change the date.
Yeah, actually, if we could vote on that, I'll be voting against the next three, so we know.
Governor, I'm gonna, with the addition of the context in the report, I'm gonna move favorable for recommendation 38.
Move to second.
I second.
Move to second. Further discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
So we have one opposition. Okay. Recommendation 39.
Move favorable on recommendation 39.
Second.
Been moved and second. Discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion
No,
approved with 2 noes. 2 nays, I should say. Using the language legislative speak. And recommendation 40.
I'd move to adopt recommendation 40.
Second.
Been moved and second. Discussion.
question.
Yes.
Question. Again, looking back earlier today, we passed the Tree Solutions Now Act in 2021. And what I understand this recommendation is to try to get more trees planted in parks or other existing local government land, in certain communities, which I don't have any problem with. I'll give you an example. They just did a 1.5 mile new road up here, and I'll bet they planted 1,000 trees. This is in Garrett County where we got millions and billions and trillions of trees probably. But anyway, I'm all for trees. If they could just vote, it would be good. But anyway, you gotta lighten it up a little bit. We passed another bill, and Senator Elfrich, you're probably familiar with, about 2 years ago dealing with trees. We talked about adding trees. I forget the name of it. Why can't we just suggest that under those things we already have in place, the priorities be given to the things mentioned in here, so you don't have to create another category and come up with another thing, and you already have it in place to say make them priorities: local and state parks, local government land, communities, individual homeowners, and all that, and put that in the existing laws where we have money to buy trees and plant them. We don't need to recreate the wheel, as I see it.
And another idea would be whenever we're building new roads throughout the state, obviously there's a lot of mitigation, wetland mitigation of the sort where they're required already to, I think it's what, 3 to 1, something like that, 5 to 1. I can't remember the exact number, mitigation. If the state would actually use state land instead of buying private property to mitigate and plant trees, that would certainly be beneficial to our parks as well.
Part of the challenge, though, is that in many communities, there simply are not the same, even close to the same level of forestation of trees that you find in other communities. And this is often based on income and based on color of communities and historic patterns. And what research is showing now is that, for example, a forested community can have as much as a 12% lower temperature, and this heat island effect that you get in many of our areas. What it's showing is that the air is cleaner in those communities that have trees. Activity level is greater. And so what we're really looking at is the question of the state forestation program and the state parks being part of the solution to an ongoing problem here. I understand that the Tree Solutions Act of 2021, for example, adopted, all make a lot of sense, but I think to say very explicitly that we're recognizing the need for a new equity in reforestation program and to proactively reforest underserved areas is the intent here. And so I think it would be a step back for us to simply say, oh, let's just use the ones we're talking about. Because if you're saying, for example, along the new road construction, that's not the challenge in so many of these communities. And just about all of our neighborhoods, we can walk through and see that extraordinary difference. So I'm hoping this stands as a individual recommendation, not just folded into other considerations.
I agree with basically everything you've said. I just think, again, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. I think if we do this and add some words that say something to the effect, take a look at existing programs dealing with planting trees and put some of these in priority of those programs, add that to this wording, I can support it. Because it does make a difference. Trees do make a difference. Air and water.
So, Senator Edwards, if I may, the wording does include in collaboration with the efforts supported by the Tree Solutions Now Act of 2021. Is that sufficient to address your concern?
There. And or any other, I think we passed another one a couple of years ago dealing with trees, and I'd like to consider any other tree programs or whatever term would be there. And support efforts supported by the Tree Solutions Now Act of 2021 and any other programs in effect in the state dealing with planting of trees. That makes it a little bit stronger, actually.
I don't think that would do any harm to have wordings along that line.
I move recommendation 40 with the amendment just described by Senator Edwards.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? One nay,
Yeah, I'll make that too.
2 nays. Okay.
Who's the nays?
I was on the fence on that one.
You don't like trees, Jeff?
I voted for it.
Oh, Senator.
I love trees, but redundancy, I'm not so. But honestly, I could have gone either way on that one. Honestly, I do think we should plant trees.
Agree, but
I think we should plant trees where we need them and not plant them where we don't need them. So I in essence, what this recommendation does.
Well, so first of all, I want to make sure Senator Edwards is recorded in the green on that as pressing. And Delegate Grace, what I really like about this recommendation is it's using, the intent is to use the same definition under Tree Solutions Now, which really does, if you look at that map, and I'm happy to send it to you, cover communities statewide, all your district, my district, across the state. So not just in highly urbanized districts, but also in districts that have historically low high unemployment, lower income, low tree canopy. So it's truly across the state.
Well, that's the only concern I have with it. Like I said, we should plant them where we need them and not plant them where we don't. I mean, I don't know that economics really, the average income really plays into it. If you have a community that's low income and poverty, but they have a lot of trees, I don't see the point in planting more trees. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Oh, I understand your point. I will say, I don't have it in front of me, but there are significant studies that suggest that tree canopy is in direct correlation with income levels.
So
Well,
the only committee I know of in the House that debates things after they've already been voted on is the House Judiciary Committee, and we are not the House Judiciary Committee. So
I got you.
Right.
Let's move on. I do have some more work to do too.
That's good.
Yes, but
All right.
I want
will
to make sure I have a yes vote.
you've convinced me to switch my vote to a yes.
That I have
So.
a yes vote on this.
thank
Thank
you.
Thank you. All right,
And
so individually now we
I
have.
always support sending more money to the metropolitan area to buy land and build and plant trees.
Now that we have approved recommendations 1 through 40, I think we need to approve all recommendations and as a group for the document that's in front of us.
I don't think we've already voted on them. I don't think we need to revote.
All right, I was following the recommendation. I think maybe the staff did not think we'd end up voting on each of them. That's fine. And then let's see, are there any new recommendations? Anything addition?
Don't we have to group as a whole,
Right,
even though we did them individually?
right.
Have to
So
vote
now-
on all 40 of them.
And now we'll vote on the whole then.
As modified.
Pardon?
So vote on, I guess, recommendations 1 through 40 as modified.
Yes.
So moved.
Moved, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
So we have a 9-0 vote. So let me go through the next quick steps before we move toward adjournment here. Number one is that a draft copy will be sent around by email for commission members' edits or any final comments and approval. And then we will probably not have another meeting and ask for a vote by email for the final report itself. Before we adjourn, I want to make a special thanks to everyone's help on this. So certainly the presiding officers, Senate President Bill Ferguson and House Speaker Adrian Jones, both of them have been very, very helpful. And we appreciate it. And I appreciate the honor of being asked to chair this. Also, I want to thank the two co-chairs, Senator Elfrist and Delegate Lutke. Both of you were very, very helpful. And especially because somehow or other I got through all those years of public service and never actually went through the legislative process like this. So I appreciate your additional insight and help. And the commission members in general, Senator Edwards, Senator Patterson, and Senator Zucker, as well as the House members, Delegate Boyce, Delegate Chang, and Delegate Chris, all have been very, very helpful. It's also nice, by the way, and I would never make a political comment in a non-political setting like this, but it's also nice to see a dialogue, even when there are some differences, and reach a resolution and try to get things done. And so for that reason, I really do appreciate everyone's help here. I also want to say publicly thank you for the presenters for their time and their insight, as well as the state agencies for their feedback. And the ongoing implementation effort, and there were a number of additional questions that come up here and there. And for the most part, the response was very prompt and thorough. And then also thanks for the public for the engagement in the process of what I hope will position Maryland in terms of its whole park system as not only being a national leader from a variety of annual evaluations, but maybe a model of how you link considerations for parks with climate change, with equity, with health, and all those sort of things. And so I think you've done a great job on that. Do any of the commission members wish to make any last comments or observations? Or I would say motions, but someone might do that right away, so. Any other discussion? Hearing none, then let me ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved, seconded,
Second.
yay, nay?
Yeah.
Well, some of them joined the group. I thought maybe some people say, no, I want to stay here longer. The motion is approved, and this will end.